Grief is an experience from which no one is exempt. Yet, we are often completely unprepared for how confusing, confronting, and crushing it feels. When we both became motherless in our early 30s, we suddenly found ourselves in an unfamiliar and surreal situation that many of our peers couldn't fully understand. When we tried to talk about our grief with people who hadn't experienced loss themselves, it would often be met with an uncomfortable silence or awkward but well-meaning platitudes. "Your mum wouldn't want you to be sad," was a common one we heard. People struggled to hear our honest experience with grief. It was isolating and lonely, despite having support from friends. This is the reason we decided to write this book, and probably one of the reasons you're listening to it now. People have no idea what to say when it comes to grief. So, even with the best intentions, they say random and misguided things in the hope that they will make you feel better. The reality is that nothing anybody says is going to make you feel better right now. Someone in your life has died. You're in deep pain and life has upended. You're a million light years from being okay. What you need is for the depth of your loss to be recognised and acknowledged. For someone to say to you, "This is so shit and unfair. I know nothing I can say will take away your pain, but I want you to know that I am here and I'm not going anywhere." If you don't have that kind of support in your life right now, rest assured that you are not the only one. There are way too many people grieving who are hiding behind a "fine, thanks," because it's easier than telling people the truth. It shouldn't be this way. That giant, looming elephant in the room, aka your grief, that nobody wants to talk about needs to be acknowledged. We want to help make that happen. It's about time we shine a light on what grief is really like, one honest conversation at a time.
Talking about grief doesn't need to be awkward. There are so many grief misconceptions and assumptions that fly around, and the expectations that people have versus the reality can be wildly off the mark. One of the biggest is that there are stages of grief that you go through, which can be ticked off neatly and then life resumes. Not true. Others might assume that you should be over your loss by a certain point and be getting back to normal, whatever that is. If your grief isn't recognised, or you feel like it must meet unrealistic expectations, it can make the whole process much harder to navigate. If anyone tries to tell you how you should be coping, or what you should be feeling, our advice is to please ignore them. And if you're telling yourself any of this, please don't beat yourself up. You're coping with a hugely difficult life experience. And right now, you owe yourself bucket loads of understanding and the space to adjust, to slow down, and to take things at your own pace. It's Sal here. One of the things that really surprised me about my grief was how, despite feeling deep pain and sadness, I was able to function pretty well. Of course, there were many moments when my emotions caught me off guard and I couldn't hold them in. Yet, in the early months, to the outside observer, I held myself together. Although I was heartbroken, the shock of loss made it possible for me to cycle through the endless tasks and meetings, basically grieving via a to-do list. While I powered on at work, in meetings, and sometimes socially, on most weekends during the first year, I struggled to get off the sofa. It was almost like I was having a grief come down from the week. But still, I judged myself and how I was processing my loss. Why was it that I could focus on practical things with a clear mind and get my work completed easily? Why wasn't I in floods of tears constantly, even though I felt sad? How come I could talk about my mum sometimes without getting upset? Was I normal? The answer is yes. Being able to function most of the time doesn't mean you're grieving any less.